He mocked her song until her voice made him cry. Chapter 1. The morning rain drummed against the windows of Apex Records in downtown Nashville, creating rivulets that distorted the city skyline beyond. Leo Martinez sat in the dimly lit audition room, his fingers drumming impatiently on the mahogany table as he checked his watch for the third time in 5 minutes. 23 years in the music industry had hardened him into something he barely recognized anymore. A man who could dissect a voice within seconds, calculate its market value, and dismiss dreams with a simple shake of his head. "Next one's here," announced Jamie, his assistant, poking her head through the door. Clara Whitfield, 22, from some small town in Kentucky, folk singer. She said the last 2 words with the same enthusiasm one might reserve for announcing a tax audit. Leo groaned audibly, not bothering to hide his disdain. Folk music, in an industry dominated by electronic beats and auto-tuned perfection, here was another hopeful with an acoustic guitar and dreams of changing the world with 3 chords and the truth. He'd seen hundreds like her, young women clutching guitars like life preservers, convinced their small-town stories would resonate with millions. They never did. The door opened slowly, and Clara entered. She was exactly what Leo expected. Worn jeans, a simple flannel shirt, auburn hair pulled back in a messy bun that suggested she'd driven through the night to get here. Her guitar case bore stickers from various coffee shops and small venues, a roadmap of rejection and persistence. She moved with the careful steps of someone afraid to take up too much space, her green eyes scanning the room before settling on Leo's impassive face. "Good morning, Mr. Martinez," she said, her voice carrying a slight Appalachian lilt that city life hadn't yet erased. "Thank you for seeing me." Leo didn't respond, merely gestured toward the small stage area with its single microphone and stool. He'd already decided this would be quick. 3 minutes, maybe 4, if she was particularly persistent, and then he'd deliver the practiced rejection speech he'd given thousands of times before. Something about not quite the right fit, or needing more development. Anything to get through the morning's roster of hopeful. Clara settled onto the stool, adjusting the microphone with trembling fingers. The guitar emerged from its case, an old Martin that had clearly seen better days, its wood worn smooth in places from countless hours of playing. She took a breath, and Leo noticed how she closed her eyes for a moment, as if gathering strength from somewhere deep within. "This is an old song," she began, her speaking voice stronger than her nervous demeanor suggested. "My grandmother taught it to me, and her mother taught it to her. It's been in my family for generations." She paused, fingers finding their position on the frets. "It's called When the Mountain Laurel Blooms." Leo's internal eye roll was almost audible. Of course, it was an old family song. These rural singers always came with their ancient ballads, thinking authenticity would trump commercial appeal. He pulled out his phone, ready to scroll through emails while she played, offering just enough peripheral attention to craft his rejection. The sooner this was over, the sooner he could move on to artists with actual potential. But something in the way she held that guitar, the reverence with which she touched the strings, made him glance up one more time. The morning light had shifted, casting her in a natural spotlight that highlighted the determination etched into her young face. For just a moment, Leo saw not another hopeful, but someone carrying something precious, something that mattered beyond contracts and streaming numbers. Still, he steeled himself against sentimentality. This was business, not therapy. Music was product, artists were investments, and folk singers from Kentucky were almost always bad bets. He'd learned long ago that the industry had no room for nostalgia or sympathy. The market demanded what it demanded, and no amount of family history or small-town charm could change that fundamental truth. Clara's fingers found the first chord, and the room filled with a simple, almost primitive progression. Leo's jaw tightened. He recognized the pattern immediately, the kind of 3-chord progression that had been recycled through countless campfire songs and church hymns. Nothing innovative, nothing that would catch a producer's ear in Los Angeles or New York. This was exactly what he'd expected. and the confirmation of his prejudgment brought a familiar, comfortable cynicism. She was about to begin singing when a memory flickered at the edge of Leo's consciousness, something about that particular chord progression that seemed almost familiar. But he pushed it away, focusing instead on the mental memo he was already composing about why Apex Records would pass on Clara Whitfield. The rain continued its percussion against the windows, and somewhere in the building another hopeful was probably warming up, preparing their own impossible dreams for scrutiny. Chapter 2. The first note that emerged from Clara's throat wasn't what Leo expected. It wasn't polished or trained in any conventional sense. There was a rawness to it, like wind through canyon walls or water over ancient stones. But it was the melody itself that made his fingers stop their impatient drumming. The words were different, Appalachian dialect thick and almost foreign, but the tune underneath them was achingly familiar, like a photograph suddenly coming into focus after years of blur. Clara's voice grew stronger as she continued, her eyes closed, lost in the story she was telling. The song spoke of mountain laurel blooming in spring, of mothers calling children home before dark, of love that endured through seasons of plenty and want. Her fingers moved across the guitar strings with a delicacy that contradicted their calloused appearance, pulling harmonics from the old instrument that seemed impossible given its condition. Leo found himself leaning forward despite himself, his phone forgotten on the table. There was something in the intervals between notes, the way she bent certain phrases, that triggered a cascade of long-buried memories. His mother's voice, soft and tired, singing to him in the hospital during those final months. The melody had been different then. Spanish words instead of English, his mother's Colombian heritage, painting the notes with different colors, but the underlying structure was unmistakably the same. "Mountain laurel grows where the heart calls home," Clara sang, and Leo heard his mother singing about jasmine blooming in Bogotá's eternal spring. The parallel was impossible, yet undeniable. How could this ancient Appalachian ballad share its bones with his mother's lullaby from thousands of miles away? Music had always been mathematical to him since her death, beats per minute, hook placement, demographic appeal, but this transcended analysis. His throat constricted as Clara reached the second verse. Her voice cracked slightly on a high note, what any other day he would have marked as a technical flaw, but today it sounded like truth. She sang of children grown and gone, of mothers waiting by windows, of the faithful bloom of mountain laurel marking time's passage. Each word was a weight on Leo's chest, pressing against defenses he'd spent 2 decades building. The memory came unbidden and complete. His mother in the hospice bed, her once strong voice reduced to a whisper, still trying to sing him to sleep at 35 years old, as if he were still her little boy. The cancer had taken everything else. Her thick dark hair, the warm brown of her skin, the strength in her hands. But it couldn't take that melody. Even when words failed her, when the morphine made her eyes cloudy and distant, she would hum those intervals. That ancient progression that he now heard echoing in Clara's Appalachian ballad. Jamie had quietly entered the room, intending to remind Leo of his next appointment, but she stopped at the door, struck by the scene. Leo Martinez, the man who'd made careers and destroyed dreams with equal indifference, had tears streaming down his face. His hands were clenched on the table, knuckles white, as if physically holding himself in place. Clara's voice rose and fell like mountain wind, unaware of the devastation she was creating in her audience of one. She sang of seasons turning, of children returning home to find everything changed yet somehow still the same, of mothers whose love outlasted their own lives in the memories of those they left behind. The old guitar seemed to gain new life under her fingers, its worn wood resonating with warmth that filled the sterile audition room. Leo's professional mask hadn't just slipped, it had shattered entirely. Every defense mechanism, every carefully constructed wall between his personal pain and professional life crumbled under the assault of that simple melody. He saw his mother's face clearly for the first time in years. Not the gaunt stranger the disease had made her, but the vibrant woman who had sung him through nightmares, homework frustrations, and teenage heartbreaks. The song was approaching its final verse, and Leo found himself desperate for it to continue, as if Clara's voice was a bridge to a past he'd severed himself from. But he also wanted it to end, to stop the emotional hemorrhaging that was undoing years of careful numbness. His reputation, built on being impervious to manipulation and emotional appeal, was dissolving with each note. Clara sang of mountain laurel blooming over graves, of love that transcended death, of voices that echoed in the wind, long after their owners had fallen silent. Her own eyes were glistening now, lost in whatever personal pain had taught her to sing with such devastating honesty. The morning rain had stopped, and sunlight streamed through the windows, catching the tears on both their faces like prisms, breaking the light into impossible colors. Chapter 3. The last note hung in the air like a prayer, reverberating off the walls of the small audition room, before finally fading into silence. Clara's eyes remained closed for a moment longer, her fingers still pressed against the strings, as if reluctant to let the song truly end. When she finally opened them, she was startled to find Leo standing, his face turned toward the window, shoulders shaking with barely controlled emotion. "Mr. Martinez," she ventured, her voice uncertain. She'd seen many reactions to her music, polite applause, distracted dismissal, occasionally genuine appreciation, but never this. Never someone undone by a simple folk song. "I'm sorry if I—" "Don't," Leo said, his voice rough with unshed tears. He turned slowly, and Clara saw a man transformed. The cold efficiency that had marked his expression when she'd entered was gone, replaced by something raw and unguarded. "Don't apologize, just tell me where you learned that song." Clara shifted on the stool, suddenly feeling like she was the one conducting the interview. "Like I said, my grandmother taught it to me. She learned it from her mother, who came from Scotland originally, but the song changed over the generations. Mountain laurel doesn't even grow in Scotland, but somehow the song adapted to these hills." She paused, studying his face. "But you know this melody, don't you? I can see it in your eyes." Leo sank back into his chair, his professional composure completely abandoned. For the first time in 20 years, he found himself sharing something personal with a stranger, an artist no less, the very type of person he'd trained himself to keep at arm's length. "My mother used to sing something almost identical, different words, different language, but the same soul, I guess. She was from Colombia, from a little village in the mountains outside Bogotá." "Ooh, music travels," Clara said softly, setting her guitar aside and leaning forward. "My grandmother used to say that the old songs find their way across oceans and mountains, changing their clothes but keeping their hearts. Maybe your mother's song and mine shared an ancestor somewhere centuries ago." Leo laughed, but it was broken half-sob. "I haven't thought about her singing in years. I've buried it so deep that I forgot. I forgot what it felt like to hear her voice." He looked at Clara with wonder and something like fear. "You brought her back for 3 minutes. Do you understand what that means?" The morning sun was climbing higher now, filling the room with golden light that made everything seem softer, more forgiving. Clara stood and moved toward Leo's desk, her movements careful but determined. She'd driven 14 hours straight to get here, had been rejected by 17 labels already, but somehow she knew this moment wasn't about her career anymore. It was about something larger, something that transcended contracts and recording deals. "My mother died when I was 16, she said quietly. "Lung disease from working in the coal dust, even though she never set foot in a mine. That's Eastern Kentucky for you. The mountains give and take in equal measure. This song was the last thing she taught me. When her breathing was so bad she could barely speak, let alone sing, she made me promise to keep it alive." She paused, meeting Leo's eyes. "Maybe that's why we're both here. Maybe the song needed you to hear it as much as I needed to sing it." Jamie had long since retreated, cancelling Leo's remaining morning appointments without being asked. She'd worked for him for 5 years and had never seen him show more emotion than mild irritation. This was something unprecedented, something that might change everything or nothing, but definitely something that needed space to unfold. Leo stood abruptly and walked to a cabinet in the corner, pulling out a bottle of whiskey that was reserved for closing major deals. He poured 2 glasses with shaking hands, offering one to Clara. "I need to tell you something about the music industry," he said, his voice gaining strength. "It's killed something in me. Or maybe I killed it myself, thinking it was necessary for survival. Every day, I sit in this chair and reduce dreams to numbers, talent to marketability, art to product. I've become everything my mother would have hated." Clara accepted the glass but didn't drink, holding it like an anchor. "But you're successful. Apex Records is one of the biggest labels in Nashville." "Success." Leo repeated the word like it was foreign. "I've signed 43 platinum artists. I've launched careers that have generated hundreds of millions in revenue, and I haven't felt anything about music, really felt it, since the day we buried my mother." He took a sip of whiskey, the burn grounding him. "Until today. Until you walked in here with your beat-up guitar and your grandmother's song and made me remember why music matters in the first place." The weight of his confession hung between them. Clara could see the battle playing out across his features, the industry titan wrestling with the grieving son, the cynical producer confronting the music lover he'd once been. She recognized the struggle because she'd faced it herself every time someone told her that folk music was dead, that authenticity didn't sell, that she needed to modernize or give up. Chapter 4. "I'm going to tell you something I've never told an artist," Leo said, setting down his glass and moving back to his chair. But instead of sitting behind the desk, he pulled it around to sit beside Clara, closing the professional distance between them. "This industry will try to destroy what you have. It'll tell you that rawness needs polish, that authenticity needs packaging, that your grandmother's song needs a beat drop and a remix to matter, and if you're not careful, you'll believe it." Clara studied his face, seeing the scars of someone who'd believed it himself. "Is that what happened to you?" "I was a musician once," Leo admitted, the words feeling strange after so long. "Classical guitar, if you can believe it. My mother saved for years to buy me lessons, worked double shifts at the factory. She'd sit and listen to me practice for hours, even when I was terrible, especially when I was terrible. She used to say that music was how souls spoke to each other across time and distance." He paused, lost in the memory. "When she got sick, I played for her every day in the hospital. But after she died, I couldn't touch a guitar without falling apart. So I became someone who sold music instead of making it. I thought it would be easier." "Was it?" Clara asked, though the answer was written in every line of his face. "It was emptier," he said simply, "which felt safer than feeling everything." He looked at her worn guitar, still sitting on the stage. "May I?" Clara nodded, watching as Leo approached the instrument with the reverence of someone entering a church after years of absence. He picked it up carefully, his fingers finding the frets with muscle memory that 2 decades couldn't erase. The first few notes were hesitant, but then something shifted. He began to play his mother's version of the melody, the Colombian folk variation that had lived in his bones all these years. The 2 versions, Appalachian and Colombian, wove together in the small room, creating harmonies that shouldn't have existed, but did. Clara began to hum along, finding the spaces where their traditions intersected and diverged. It was like watching 2 rivers that had split centuries ago, finding their way back to each other, carrying different sediments, but flowing from the same source. "Your technique," Clara said softly, not wanting to break the spell. "It's classically trained, but there's something else, something more intuitive." Leo smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. "My mother couldn't read music, but she could play anything she heard once. She taught me that music lived in the spaces between the notes, in the breath before the phrase, in the silence after the song ends. I spent years in conservatory trying to train that out of myself, and then years in the industry trying to forget I ever knew it." He set the guitar down gently and returned to his seat. The executive was reassembling himself, But something fundamental had changed. The armor was going back on, but it no longer fit quite right, like clothes that belonged to someone else. "Here's what's going to happen," Leo said, his voice carrying a new authority, different from the cold command of before. "I'm not going to sign you to Apex Records." Clara's face fell, but he held up his hand. "I'm not going to sign you because Apex would destroy what you have. They'd put you with writers who don't understand that some songs are prayers, not products. They'd schedule you with producers who would strip mine your authenticity for something more marketable." "Then why?" Clara began, confusion evident. "Because I'm going to do something else," Leo continued. "Something I should have done years ago. I'm going to start my own label, small, focused on artists like you who carry traditions that matter more than trends. Real music, the kind that makes people remember who they are, where they come from, why they're alive." He pulled out his phone, scrolling through contacts with sudden urgency. "I know investors who've been waiting for me to remember what music is supposed to be, people who got into this industry for the right reasons and have been waiting for someone to remind them." Clara felt tears starting to fall, but she didn't wipe them away. "You'd do that? Risk everything you've built?" Leo looked at her, and for the first time she could see the man his mother must have known, passionate, alive, unafraid of feeling. "Everything I've built is a monument to numbness. You just reminded me that I used to be someone who believed that music could change the world, one heart at a time. My mother would have loved your song. She would have loved your voice, the way it carries truth without polish." He stood, extending his hand. "So, yes, I'd risk it all. I should have risked it years ago." Clara took his hand, feeling the calluses that even decades of desk work hadn't completely erased. Outside, Nashville churned on, the machine of the music industry grinding through dreams and talents with mechanical indifference. But in this small room, two people had found something else. A connection across cultures and generations, a reminder that music's true power lay not in its commercial potential, but in its ability to resurrect the dead, to bridge the unbridgeable, to make cynics remember how to cry. "We'll start small," Leo said, already making plans. "We'll record your grandmother's song exactly as you sang it today. No production, no tricks, just truth. And we'll find others like you, carriers of traditions that deserve to survive." He paused, emotion threatening to overwhelm him again. "We'll call it Mountain Laurel Records, if you don't mind. For your grandmother, for my mother, for all the voices that refuse to be silenced." Clara nodded, unable to speak. She'd come here hoping for a record deal, for a chance at success as the industry defined it. Instead, she'd found something far more valuable. A broken man ready to rebuild himself around something real. A partnership founded on grief, transformed into purpose. A chance to make music that mattered in ways that couldn't be measured in sales or streams. As she packed her guitar, Leo called after her, "Clara, bring more songs like that one. Bring all the old songs, the ones your grandmother thought no one would want to hear. Those are the ones the world needs most." Walking out into the Nashville afternoon, Clara felt the weight of her guitar case differently. It wasn't just an instrument anymore, but a vessel carrying voices across time. Behind her, Leo stood at his window, watching her go, already composing his resignation letter to Apex in his mind. For the first time in 20 years, he felt his mother's presence not as an ache, but as a blessing. Her voice harmonizing with Clara's in his memory, teaching him once again that music's greatest power was not in what it could sell, but in what it could heal. The mountain laurel would bloom again in Nashville this time, carrying songs from Appalachian hills and Colombian mountains, from Scottish highlands and places yet unknown. And somewhere, Leo knew, his mother was singing along.